Jonathan LeBlanc,
Here.
Scott Ryder,
Here.
Joyce Hall,
Here.
Charlotte Riley,
Here.
Gina Sakala for Cindy Mangini.
I think I'm here, but it's gonna be my committee now. She's gonna come in when I'm not available.
Okie dokie. Myself, Wendy Costa is here, and both the superintendent and assistant superintendent are on as well. Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm hoping that everybody who's watching, I certainly know the board member sat in on the board meeting last week, so I know you listened to what the superintendent was saying. I hope everybody had a chance to view the Board of Ed meeting. I'm not going to reiterate all 45 minutes of what Mr. Dresik had to say. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. And if you don't want to watch the whole meeting, it starts at about minute 35. But I do want to talk about just a couple things that were brought up. As I understand it, there's two deliverables to the state. One is July 17th, where we're being asked to quantify what we expect school enrollment in school to be should schools open in September. So how many parents think they will be sending their kids to school versus either homeschooling or distance learning. I think everybody does know by now that if schools do open, you do still have the option to do distance learning for your student if you're not comfortable sending your child to school. So a survey has been sent out last week, asking parents to fill out the survey. It asks questions about whether your child will be returning to school, do you think? Will they be partaking in bus transportation if they're eligible? What your Wi-Fi situation is, and things like that. I believe the survey is due back tomorrow. So I strongly encourage everyone, if you haven't already filled it out, to please get it back in. The school system needs that information to sort of help craft what the school day is going to look like if we go back to school. And you do have to fill out one survey per child. So if you have more than one child in the school system, you need to fill out one per child. The second deliverable to the state is a reopening plan by July 24th, and it's really 3 plans, I guess. One is a in-person plan, which is what the governor's leaning towards right now, a hybrid plan, and 100% virtual plan. I think in the board meeting, Mr. Dresik made it very clear that if we go back to school, as the current plan calls for, it's not going to look anything like what we're used to seeing. It may look like what I was used to seeing when I was in school, but not what you were used to seeing in this day and age. The state requirements seem to focus a lot on masks, hygiene and cleaning, and cohorting. As of right now, it is non-negotiable about students and staff wearing masks all day, with the exception of mask breaks. Teachers are going to be able to pull their mask down while they're teaching, as long as they're 6 feet away. All the desks are going to be facing the same way. There's going to be no group activities, no small groups of things. It's going to be very different. The students do not have to, it's not a requirement that the students are 6 feet apart. That would be a nice goal, but it is not a requirement right now. I know that we're also in the process of ordering face shields for the teachers so that when they do pull down their mask, they'll have a face shield, and this will help the children be able to see their mouths as they move. Busing, buses can be near capacity, and I'm hoping when we get to Q&A, somebody can define what near capacity is, but probably not yet. And buses, you'll be required to wear masks on buses as well. Cohorting is a big term now, and cohorting is really where you'll drop your child, or your child will go to school and be in a room with the same kids all day, and not move around the school freely. If necessary, teachers will change rooms. Probably works well in the lower grades, the K through fives, but once you get to middle school and high school, not sure it works as well. And even in the lower grades, as much as they can cohort in the classroom, um, clearly once they get on a bus, they're no longer with just their cohort, they're with other kids in the neighborhood and from different schools. So there is that. Um, so based on parent comments that I still see being made, and as board members, we get a lot of questions from parents. There's a lot out on social media. A lot gets forwarded to us, whatever. I do want to reiterate, as the superintendent laid out in the last meeting, there are privacy and legal issues with streaming and or videotaping a teacher live while she or he is teaching. So as of at least the board meeting last Tuesday, it was not a possibility that we just have 10 kids in the class and 10 at home watching the teacher while he or she is doing their teaching. I know it sounds easy, but it's not. I also want to stress that the in-person plan right now calls for all students that opt for that all day, every day. So not a 2 on, 2 off, not a half day or any of that. And of course, this is all contingent upon Connecticut's numbers and not seeing a significant increase in COVID cases. So, clearly the key is flexibility. So I think that summarizes some of the highlights. I would like to get an update on any changes in state guidelines, if any, that we're aware of, or open-ended questions that came out of looking at the 50 pages of guidelines. I do know today the governor didn't allow Chris to know ahead of time, but it was announced that the 180-day rule would be waived, and you could go to 177 days, providing you use those 3 days at the beginning of the year for teacher training around COVID-related matters. So I think that is something certainly to be considered. But Chris, is there any other guidelines that we've gotten or clarity on guidelines that were sort of murky, like what near capacity of a bus might be or anything like that?
Not that particular question. That's still one that's under consideration for what near capacity actually means, particularly when it comes to transportation. But as you mentioned, at some point this morning, I think we all got news alerts on our phone, and then shortly after, I did inform board members, but that the State Board of Education did vote to waive the 180-day school year requirement for all kids in Connecticut. And they've reduced that number down to 177. So in our case, and if you look at the actual resolution, it's clearly stated that those days, if they're flexible, meaning they're not mandatory to go to 177. But in the event a district were to utilize the additional 3 days, it is mandated that those 3 days would be at the beginning of the school year for the explicit purpose of training staff members, parents, students, obviously, on health and safety measures. That's still broadly defined, as well as any additional training that might be required for distance learning, if that is a component of the plan, or any component of our plan of the reopening plan that folks may not be all that familiar with. So what that would mean for us is that if we were to take advantage of the 177 days, that would change our first day of school to actually now be September 8th, which is the Tuesday after Labor Day this year. Labor Day is later. And that would allow teachers to come back at the regularly scheduled time at which we already have on the adaptive calendar, which is August 31st. But the benefit is that we would actually have teachers without students for an entire week to shore up any of the trainings that were required. We're already getting a bunch of ideas through talking with administrators today about utilizing those days to maybe do some mock runs and have students maybe come to the building so they can actually see. We've had principals today say maybe we could hold, things like open houses are not going to be necessarily capable, like they have been traditionally in the past. And they're usually done after school starts, but maybe during that week we can do virtual open houses so parents can see what their children are getting into. So there's there's a little bit more leeway with what we're able to do from that perspective. Clarification on the actual guidelines that are out are still pending. And the one clarification that has happened since I spoke with the board is in regards to the plan document itself. As Wendy mentioned earlier, there's two things I have to deliver to the state. One is just a survey that gives us an indication on how many people responded to our survey that they're going to return to school. And the bigger question is, how much do we think this whole thing is going to cost? Which is kind of putting the cart before the horse, but we're going to do the best we can to speculate on what additional costs are going to be. And the other one is we have to submit essentially 3 plans to the state, one for reopening in person, one for a hybrid model, and then ultimately what our distance learning plan is going to be. The one change that happened was we are in receipt from the state a template. And I think there's going to be a little bit of confusion, and I've talked to a lot of neighboring superintendents over the last few days, is that there seems to be an expectation in a lot of communities that they know that date is July 24th, so they expect this prepackaged, very pretty, descriptive program as to what school is going to look like on the first day of school. That's not what's actually required by us, by the state of Connecticut. The state of Connecticut is requiring that we fill out the template. And the template would ask questions such as, do you plan on communicating your plan with parents and the public? And the answer would be yes, and this is how we're going to do it. So I just don't want there to be this, magical date of July 24th that people think, okay, the plan is going to be out there. We're going to know exactly how everything's going to look like, because the state isn't necessarily requiring all of us to have it packaged up and very, very well written, I should say, for lack of a better term, and very well easily interpreted and easy to understand. The state is requiring us to send essentially the outline of what the plans are going to be and allowing us to fine tune those more so geared toward the individual district as opposed to just everybody's going to have a blanket plan. And I don't recall if I had said that in my 45 minutes last week, so I wanted to make sure I repeated that point. But as far as clarification on some of the outstanding questions, unfortunately, as of this afternoon, we still don't have anything new to report from what I shared of the concerns that I had last week. But that hasn't stopped us from continuing to push on. We've been working very hard with our administrative team to try to come up with what the foundation of our plan is going to be based on the guidelines. And we've actually made significant progress to be in a better position today than we were a week ago at this time. And I know the next question is going to be, can you tell me what it is? And the answer right now is going to be no, only because there are also the collective bargaining issues that we have to iron out before we can produce something that we would share with the public and the community. There are going to be changes to the way people expect school to operate. I think everybody has to understand that. And part of that is also going to, maybe not, maybe, we're trying to avoid it, but if it also changes the way that our employees have to fulfill their daily functions, those are conversations that we're required to have prior to making any firm decisions on how it's going to be. I will tell you, and hope that you just trust me on this, and Andy's on the line. We had some very productive conversations this afternoon, which I think we're in a much better place today than we were a week ago. And we're hopeful that once the survey is completed, which will be tomorrow, we can really start putting together more communication than we have thus far in a timelier fashion. But there were a lot of major hurdles that we had to look into, particularly when it came to things like space and staffing and those types of issues, that we were able to move some things around over the last 24, 48 hours that will put us in a position to rectify some of the concerns that we had going forward. I'm still not going to change some of the questions that are out there that we just simply don't know the answer to. And in addition to meetings like this, I'm getting a lot of questions from staff members who unfortunately, they're going to hear sometimes the same answer of, a great question, I just don't know the answer at this point. But we'll continue to ask and try to get clarification. So the big news today was moving down from 180-day requirement to 177. That gives us a little bit more flexibility at the beginning of the year. That in the event we don't do as much training as we think we need, we have that flexibility. But as board members, you also have to realize you set the board calendar. So I can't just unilaterally change the first day of school and knock it down to 177 school days, which technically, if September 8th is our first day of school, that would be we'd have 178 days on the calendar, because as you know, the Enfield Public Schools actually attend schools 181 days, although the state requirement is only 180 days. That's a conversation we have to have with the board. I have to have a conversation with the 2 collective bargaining units, because for their agreements, we have to consult with them before we make calendar changes. I've had one of those conversations today since the documentation came out this afternoon. I still have another conversation to have, but hopefully we'll be in a position to start sharing more detailed information within the 10 days to come.
All right, well, thank you. Next, if we could talk about the things that are sort of completed or in the books, but also what's being worked on, but also focusing on, what the stumbling blocks are, either in terms of how are we going to pay for it, or what some of the issues are. So for instance, I know we bought one-on-one devices for every kid, grade K through 12, I believe. So that should make distance learning that much better of an experience for everyone. We did the survey to find out who doesn't have internet, so that we can somehow make arrangements that that's not a stumbling block for the kids or the parents. I know you said you purchased 10,000 masks to get us started, not knowing what the state's going to do for us, if anything. I know you talked about potentially face shields for the teachers, either through a grant, or if not, we're just going to buy them because it's something that's necessary. I know that the B&G folks have been out measuring classrooms so that we can figure out how far apart kids are going to be, and if they had to be 6 feet apart, what would that look like? But what other kinds of things can we sort of check off and say, yep, that's done? Or I mean, I know I sit on the curriculum meetings, and I know they are just, busy as can be, because everything is different for them as it relates to curriculum, both, even if it's in school, it's totally different than what they've been doing in the past, let alone improving upon distance learning and whatever a hybrid model might be. So if we could just talk a little bit about the things that have been done.
Can I ask one of the questions about those things that have been done? In the measurement of the classrooms, was there an estimate as to how many students could fit in the generic classroom?
Yes. So nothing at this point is etched in stone, because for the reasons I stated earlier, we still have to have further conversations. But just I'm comfortable sharing this publicly. One of the things that we looked at was trying to come up with a maximum class size number for kids that we would put per classroom. So we started looking at maximizing class sizes at 15 across the elementary level, and just the K to 5 level. And one of the challenges that we discovered was, in order to do that, not only would it be required for us to hire 24 additional teachers based on our enrollment projections, but more concerningly is that we would have to find 24 additional classrooms. So even in the event we were able to fund and find 24 teachers, you all have been to our buildings enough to know that finding 24 additional classroom spaces is just unattainable. So although the survey is not complete at this point and it is subject to change, we are getting a very positive response with the amount of participation that we're getting back from families. And we're running right now about 80%. 80% of parents that say they intend to send their child back to school if classes are held in person. I'm going to say that with an asterisk, because although I've said at the board meeting last week and Wendy reiterated the conversation about masks, the last question on the survey was open-ended, and we asked parents to share any concerns or anything they'd like to add, sort of a write-in question at the end. And of that 80% of families who have replied that yes, they intend to send their child back to school, a vast majority of those open-ended questions were, yes, I'm going to send my child to school, but no, I don't want my child wearing a mask all day. So that number could be skewed based upon the second part of the question that was asked. So that is taken into consideration, but from our perspective, we're looking at that 80% as being a conservative number. So what we were able to do, and we just kind of finished it up today, was looking at class sizes at the K-5 level. If we can move class sizes to 18, we have the staffing to satisfy the needs for classes to be at that average class of 18. Some will be less, some will be more, but no one really exceeds 19, but the average class size for us would be 18. Factoring in the 20% that we are aware of now of families who've indicated they are not going to return to in-person classes, by reducing that 20% from that 18 student average, our average actually gets below 15. So right now, as it stands, without a giant increase in enrollment or people changing their mind, we think worst case scenario, our average class size K-5 would be about 14 and a half. If we average 14 and a half based on, and one correction, our B&G staff has been phenomenal. It was actually our administrators who went and measured classes for us. It wasn't just B&G that went out there. Our principals and our administrators and superhero John Daig actually went to each classroom and with a laser measure and started measuring them out. The reason 15 was the magic number, because although the state guidelines only require 3 feet while we're in class, separating students between each other, we obviously want to strive to larger than that if we can. And if our class sizes, and some classrooms are different because the layouts are a little bit smaller in some places and larger in others, but we feel that at an average class size of 15, that we can actually increase the distance between student desks and still be able to hold the in-person classes with more exceeding that 3-foot radius around each student. Actually, in 15, in a lot of classes, we can get pretty close to that 5-6 foot barrier that we were obviously striving for. The reason that we're making such a concerted effort to make more room in between students if feasible is because I alone am not the one hearing the concerns with regarding masks. That was the number one topic of every conversation I've had with groups of colleagues over the last week. And my concern is that if I'm hearing those concerns and all other superintendents are hearing them, folks in Hartford are hearing those concerns as well. And my concern is if there's any backtracking on the mask requirement, then that's just going to mean that the social distancing enhancements is going to become all that more mandatory. So I want to make sure that we're in a position that if we're required to go beyond the 3 feet as the guidelines state now, we're able to do so. So based on the numbers we have at the moment, we feel pretty confident that with a lot of materials in the classroom removed, I mean, the classrooms are going to look pretty bare outside of, and I don't want to call them desks because in some cases they're not desks, they're tables, but we'll call them desks for argument's sake. There's going to be rows of desks with a minimum of 3 feet radius around every student and a teacher workstation at the front of the classroom. And by removing all the excess materials in the classroom, we're able to create a larger barrier between each student.
So if students can be 6 feet apart, does the mask requirement go away?
No, right now masks are non-negotiable no matter how far apart.
Okay.
The only time students are allowed to remove their masks are obviously when they're eating. And if we have a designated mask break, but those are right now, although it's not required where the mask break is, it is highly recommended that the mask breaks would take part outdoors. So the mask can be removed for breaks, but we've been guided to try to schedule those breaks as best we can outside.
Okay, thank you. That was
Wendy,
depressing.
can I ask something?
Yes.
While it was brought up, Chris, or Superintendent, can you just explain a little bit in detail about at the end of the survey, there was an agreement button, and I just want you to be able to explain that a little more in depth. If people went one way or another on their survey, I think there's a misconception that agreement is kind of like a set in stone, that's what you have to do mentality. So can you just go in depth a little bit on that, just to clear that up?
Sure. The agreement button is like the submit button, like when you take part in any survey. I have gotten questions from parents saying, I submitted it this way. This is how I feel at the moment. Are my answers binding? And the reality is no. Not at the present time, none of these answers are binding. The way that the survey was set up, it was you agree to the information that you're sending. And the important part for us was making sure that you agree that you gave the right student name, gave the right information on where your child's going, grades, things along those lines. And for us to get a handle on just how many people are planning on coming back in person, how many people are planning on using transportation. And I think it was just a misconception that people thought by saying agree, I'm bound by it. Right now, nothing in the law permits us to bind anyone by answering any survey. Now, one of the things we're exploring is what's reasonable for a timeline for us to know and lock in a parent on a decision that they make. We are not at that at this point. I do anticipate having to send something else out in the coming weeks to tell parents, okay, I need a final decision on what you plan on doing. The purpose of this survey is to get an idea for planning purposes. But the way the law is written now, nothing bounds a parent to say that I fill out the survey on July 14th and I can't change my mind. One of the clarifications we're looking for is at what point can we hold people to this, and not to be, and I should reiterate that I understand how difficult a decision this is for parents, because like all of you out there watching, I had to answer a very similar survey for my own kids, and I had to have a very tough conversation with my wife about what we were planning on doing for our own children. I'm not trying to minimize that at all, but from a planning perspective, the question that we have is there a reasonable time frame that we can hold parents to if they choose to opt out? So for instance, for transportation in the past, we have explored, because we have, years past, people would call and say we have a lot of empty buses. Now, legally, we have to provide a seat for every child who's entitled to it. But we are permitted to ask parents, if you're not using the seat and you're going to, your student drives or you're going to drop your own child off, you can opt out of transportation for a certain period of time. And then it's reasonable for you to get your seat back if you give us, say, 48 hours notice. So we can't legally take that away from you, but we can ask you, and it's been deemed reasonable to say, we'll give you the seat back, but you have to give us a little bit of notice for planning. The $1 million question out there right now is, how long is that reasonable period of time? The parents who may indicate that if they're going to opt out, how much time do they have to tell us before they make the decision if they want to return? So I've heard anything from a semester to the first quarter to a month, 2 weeks. That's going to be something that's going to be worked out between the legislature, the governor's office, and a team of lawyers. That's not going to be a decision that anyone that's on this call or watching at home right now would have the authority. But again, the purpose of that survey wasn't to say, you answered yes, we're going to lock you into it. It was, we need to know this for planning purposes. And maybe the word agree might have not have been the best one to conclude it. But I can definitely, we're going to be in a position to have to ask that question.
Okay, Jonathan? Okay, item 6 on the agenda is Q&A. I've been gathering questions that parents have been asking different people, posting on social media and what have you. And I know that there's a million questions that you can't answer yet. So hopefully these will be questions you can answer and at least gets us started in a direction of letting people know some things. We did talk about the survey, and you said right now it's leaning towards 80%, although some of those 80% won't wear a mask. What can you tell us what the response rate has been? How many surveys have you gotten back?
Total surveys, we're over half of our population at last count, but I haven't got today's count. So, the response rate initially, we were over 2,000 within 24 hours of it getting out. So word did get out, and people were responsive to it. I haven't gotten the final numbers as of today because we've been dealing with all this other stuff, and I had to make sure we were plugged in here today. So We're hopeful that, obviously about 5,000 is the number we're shooting for because that's how many kids we have. We were well over half of that at last count, and not considering the weekend. So we're hopeful that we get as close to that 5,000 number as we can. We're kind of hovering around that 3,000 mark at last count. But we also know in surveys, when there's a deadline, it's usually the last 2 days that you get the last push for. So we're hoping that we can close that gap over the next 24 hours.
And is the deadline tomorrow? It is tomorrow, right?
Close of business tomorrow.
I was going to ask what time. So by 5 p.m. tomorrow?
Yeah, we'll keep it open, obviously, into the night in case people go into later, but we're asking people, like, we say close of business so that people have a general idea.
Thank you.
Wendy, this is the first time I've been at one of these meetings, so whenever you get around to it, I do have a question.
Well, go for it right now.
Oh, okay. So, you had said something in the very beginning about how live streaming classrooms, if we're talking about either a hybrid model or really distance learning, or really even kids going back to school and some families choosing to distance learn, you said something about it not being possible and having privacy issues or legal issues about being able to live stream. I need an explanation on what those issues are, because there should be no issue with being able to Zoom a class so those who choose to distance learn can get the exact same instruction that those who choose to go into a classroom. So I don't know if you misspoke. I don't know if there's something that's specific that there are legal issues, but there is no issue with streaming or having a Zoom class online because other districts have done it. So I guess I need some clarification on what you meant.
No, I didn't misspeak. There are legal issues in different areas. One, obviously, if you're going to simultaneously live stream a class when students are part, because the question came up, if some kids choose to stay home and other kids choose to take part in a live streaming class, they would all, in a perfect world, be witnessing the same instruction.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions is, in the event the camera doesn't just stay on the instructor, if you happen to get other children in the camera and that's being live streamed to a student who's watching at home, there could be confidentiality and privacy issues because we don't know who's watching at home who'll be watching into a class. We don't let anybody come in off the street and just watch a class. Well, if we're live streaming a class and there are other students physically in the classroom who are watching that, and their image gets portrayed on that live stream, and it's being broadcast to other students who aren't physically in the building, we don't know who else is in that home that could possibly be watching that classroom with kids they're not authorized to see. So that's one potential legal issue.
So what is this live streaming? Because I mean, I probably understand a little more than some and not as much as others, but live streaming, what is the difference between doing that and what either the lower classrooms had done this year with either having like live classroom meetups on your Office program, Office 360, or Zoom classes? Those are allowed. So what's the difference?
That wasn't the way that the original question last week was brought, but the difference would be a couple of reasons. So there's obviously legal issues with the question that was raised were, if some kids don't want to attend school, can't we just film it so they can sit at home and watch the same exact classroom that the kids that are attending can watch? And there are legal issues that hurdles we'd have to jump over in order to make that happen, including protecting the children that are in the classroom from their image being broadcast outside of the classroom. The difference between doing a Zoom or a Teams class like this is that it's one-to-one with the teacher focusing and the kids only having the access to get it. Now, we do have some of those same issues with other kids in the home who may be witnessing something else, but because it's only viewing the teacher in that interaction, those aren't as a concern. There are other concerns, which I won't get into too many specifics with, but there are some kids who are, or families who, for a myriad of reasons, don't allow their children to be photographed or videotaped for legal reasons of their own. So we have to be very leery about that as well. The other issue right now, and it's not going to be an issue that you take up with me, but I know that CEA takes a very different stance when it comes to live streaming and broadcasting teachers giving virtual instruction out of concerns that people can take screenshots and do things with those images. That's going to be a conversation that's going to be continuing throughout this whole process. Not going to be an Enfield specific conversation. This is a statewide conversation that's happening right now between CEA and AFT and everybody else involved in this, because there are significant concerns on their part about us requiring teachers to live stream into kids and have what families or kids or whoever's on the receiving end of that instruction can do with that image. We don't have to agree, but that's an actual concern coming down from the state. So there are numerous hurdles to get over to do that. I don't know if you saw, but I said it sounds like the suggestion to do that was actually originally given to me by my wife, saying, well, why can't we just film the teacher? Kids who are there are getting it. Kids at home will get the same exact thing. That way it's equitable. Without knowing all the other layers that go into it, there's a lot of potential issues we would have to clean up prior to doing it.
I mean, I guess I understand that, but I agree with your wife. You know, I think I would be more apt to theoretically have my kid distant learn if it was a distant teaching and he was getting the exact same instruction as the children who were in a classroom. And I think that might determine for a lot of people if they're going to send their kid in or if they're going to stay home and learn. I mean, there are confidential, I don't know. I mean, I know we do it for court because we are now all virtual for court. So there's confidential Zoom outlets you can do. And, you know, there's all the warnings and the abominations that you read everybody and it's confidential, but what people do with it in the end, I guess, is what people do with it in the end.
Unlike my wife, Mr. Collins, she doesn't have to worry about getting sued if we screw it up. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
you and I both do.
Yeah.
So right now, that's in the hands of legal counsel to tell us how we can do that if that's the road we're going to go.
Okay.
I mean, obviously that would be an ideal situation to me. And then I think more parents would be willing to keep their kids home to do distance learning if they knew, and then you'd have less issues with a lot of kids in the classroom. Of course, then you have the issues of if parents are working and the kids are in daycare, then that might be an issue as well. So thank you. So are you all set now, Gina?
For now, yeah. Thanks.
Okay. Were there any surprises in the survey that you have seen so far?
Yeah, I guess I shouldn't be surprised at anything. Some of the responses were colorful, so those were a surprise. You know, anytime you survey 5,000 parents, you're going to get a broad spectrum of responses, and you really get a better picture about how people feel as individuals about this on both sides, about sending their child back and not sending their child back. The one surprise that we did say that I mentioned earlier was, you know, the response rate was higher for, you know, we were kind of thinking that somewhere in that 60% range of parents that were more comfortable sending their kids back. So in one sense, I was surprised that our number was hovering around 80%. But that second part of the question is what I think opened my eyes a little bit, that I don't really know if everyone who participated in the survey clearly understood, like, whether they think it's me or not, it doesn't matter. Like, the masks are not negotiable. So as many people who responded and said, no, I'm sending my kid back, but my son or daughter can't wear a mask all day long. So, okay, so where are we? What does that mean? Like, so at some point we're going to have to, although it was stated at the beginning and we've included it and everything, that's going to be a part of the communication that's going to have to be ongoing with families to say, please understand, but it's not optional. And it's not an Enfield decision. It's a state of Connecticut decision. And until they give us further direction and retract from that, masks are going to be required. That was the big surprise, just numbers wise. But
Yeah.
Other than that, it was pretty much what we expected.
Okay. Was there or was there not a survey done earlier about the spring distance learning? And I asked because we've received several questions from parents that they would like to be asked about how distance learning went. And I know some loved the packets, some hated the packets, some liked this, some hated that. I mean, but was there a survey done?
There was reach out from individual schools on it because it was more school related. Because when we had first, like I said, when we first went out, no one anticipated us being in the position that we were in. District wide, I did not send something out that surveyed parents on, what did you think? And part of my rationale for that was the people who were going to respond, I kind of already knew because I had received probably 20 to 30 messages a day throughout the whole process. And I just made the decision that if someone took it upon themselves to reach out to me and share their concern, that I responded to every single one of them. And I thought that was the best way to handle it because at the same time, we didn't have a lot of choices or options as to whether or not this was working. But that's going to be something that in the event we are forced to go back again, that's going to be part of our communication. Asking what part didn't work. We know a lot of the things that didn't work because it was done so quickly and kind of piecemeal. But the fact that we're in a better position now, A, with devices, B, with internet connectivity. I mean, the numbers that we're hearing back from parents who have absolutely no Wi-Fi in their district and in their homes is very small, which I'm pleasantly surprised about. Is another surprise about the survey. Enough so that we can ensure that we can accommodate all those families who don't have Wi-Fi connections. But it's going to look, distance learning is going to look a lot different if we have to do it again. When we had Pam Estes report back to the board about how distance learning was going for her from a teacher's perspective, she talked a lot about synchronous and asynchronous learning. We weren't in a position to do synchronous learning because not every kid had a device. Not every student or family had the access to get on. But now that we're able to provide the devices and the connectivity for every student, we can make that transition. And a lot of the plans that you referenced earlier about talking with our curriculum folks are really geared toward that. And the structure, and a lot of the concerns I heard from parents about the lack of structure because they didn't have a set time every day. Every child in the home didn't have a device, so they may be sharing, so they couldn't get on all the same time. A lot of the feedback that I heard personally and through our administrative team and through, quite honestly, through the 9 of you, has really guided our decision making on how we're going to do this again in the fall. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yep, no. So one-on-one devices, we now have for every student, not that the students have them yet, but I'm assuming, and I think you did mention this, that there'll be training early on in the school year for the students, especially the younger ones. Is there going to be any opportunity for parent training? From things ranging from how do I get on the internet to Teams and everything else?
Yes, guys, plug your ears. There's going to be training prior to the school year. Now, we can't legally ask staff members to come back in if they're not working over the summer, but that doesn't prohibit us from putting information on and utilizing platforms such as not just websites, but our YouTube channels and putting how-to videos out, creating opportunities for people to interact with us on how to use it. But we have to train everyone. I mean, our staff members at the lower levels, they know how to work an iPad, but they've never been required to use an iPad for instruction all day. They're going to be now. We have to train our staff members. Our kids don't know necessarily how to use them. They may not, some kids may have iPads in their home or may have experience using them, but for probably very different reasons than for what we're giving them to them for. So we need to train our kids. Just as importantly, if not more importantly, is we have to train parents. Because they're going to be the help desk when something goes wrong in their home. Because if it's not working, in the event we're in a full distance learning mode again, they're not going to have the opportunity to get a real-time answer when they have a concern. Now, we'll have obviously a platform available for people to send inquiries and questions on, but the more we can show them and guide them to where resources are so they can troubleshoot on their own in the event they can't get a hold of somebody at the school relatively quickly. And it could just be as easily as how to connect it to Wi-Fi, how to make sure you're getting on this platform. The teacher sends out a different app that they're going to use for their class, if it's Class Dojo, whatever they're going to use, including Teams, which is the platform that we use for our board meetings and we use for our in-person meetings. There's a lot more capability in Teams than we utilized when we first went live with this back in March. A, it was necessity. We never had to use it. And B, now that we're getting our getting more involved on a daily basis using it, there's a lot more interactive components to Teams for educational purposes than we originally utilized. We couldn't utilize it before because, again, not every child had a device in order to communicate with us. But using sharing assignments, submitting assignments, working on assignments, you can do that through the Teams. And I'm not an expert on it, so I'm going to shut up. But I can tell you that the plans and the communication and the training, you're going to see them before kids come back to school and before teachers come back to school. You're probably going to see that in the coming days and weeks because we need to start getting that information out. I just don't want to say a specific date because I did that once and we didn't make it and it was my fault. So how about as soon as we humanly can get it out, we will.
Okay.
Wendy, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
When we end up with our generic classroom, which is rather barren at this point because we have to have room for all these student desks separated, are we also going to have special situation for hand washing and teachers teaching hand washing, even though the kids would probably have had some experience with that? And how we're doing restroom use? Have we come to any conclusion about lunches? Ideally, I suspect having it in the classroom keeps the cohorts together with a minimum of transportation from room to room. On the other hand, it means more cleaning in the classroom during the class day. All of those considerations will add to the cost, I believe, over time. How are we looking at this point?
So you are correct. Although nothing's finalized at the moment, one of the big hurdles is figuring out what to do about lunch, how to feed kids and where the best place to feed them. And increasingly more and more, as you stated, Joyce, that the classrooms seem to be the best option. But we have to go and get some stamps of approval before we're able to do that from a health and safety perspective. Part of the plan that I have to submit by the 24th, although it's not going to be this nice packaged pretty document that we're ultimately going to send out on the 20th. It's not going to be on the 24th. It will be shortly after that. But part of that plan is also sending out training and professional development for the entire community on just those things that you mentioned, on hand washing, on how to properly social distance, how to properly wear a mask, the importance of wearing a mask. These are all requirements that the state has put on us to train parents, staff, and kids prior to coming to school. And I suspect, although it's not indicated in the resolution, that part of the reason why we were granted 3 less days of required school for all kids this year is to hold those such trainings. Now, we have the option of getting a jump start on that and holding those trainings virtually or making the resources available virtually. But there are going to be requirements that we hold these trainings not just with staff members, but with kids and with parents. We are working constantly with our buildings and ground staff when it comes to the availability of sanitized stations. So whether it be a hand washing station, not every classroom has a sink. But we do have questions right now with regards to hand sanitizer. Those things, that stuff is 100% alcohol. And our fire marshals have concerns with giant vats of hand sanitizer all over the school, rightfully so, because the fire code says that. So those are all things that we're in the process right now, knee deep into doing. But that's all going to be a result of this because we don't have a choice. That's part of the requirements to do this, is making sure we're communicating and training everyone on health and safety measures. So yes, there might have been another question there, Joe. Sorry,
It's the cost involved that I had thrown at you.
We're rolling. We're trying the best we can. I mean, the cost at this point is going to be a conservative estimate, just because there are things we don't know. We don't know how much all this stuff is going to cost. Like I mentioned earlier or last week that although the guidelines require masks, and the guidelines say that in the event a student doesn't have a mask, the district shall provide. So what does that mean? Does that mean I have to get every kid a mask or just the child who shows up and doesn't have it? So I don't want to take that chance. I don't want to deny a kid coming into school on the first day because they forgot a mask or didn't bring it. So we're going to eliminate that. We're going to provide everybody in the district a mask, students and kids. We talk about face shields earlier. Right now our staff members, I mean, we have kids who, how they process is they actually watch their teacher's mouth move. Not just children with hearing impairments, but sometimes some of our younger kids cognitively have to watch their teachers talk. How are they going to do that if the teacher's wearing a mask? So there are going to be times where the teacher has to physically pull the mask down. And out of respect for them and a comfort level, if they're unmasked, we at least want to provide whatever level of protection we can for them as well, which is why we're giving all our employees face masks. We have a call in right now. They make face masks where this part is clear. So we're trying to put an order in for some of those. So that way, if you're talking, you can still read someone's lips because that part of the mask is clear. So there's a lot of different products out there that we're trying to get our hands on. But you're right. It's not a cost that any of us budgeted for. But like anything else, we don't have a choice. And we're going to figure it out. And if we have to move things around in order to make it work, we will. But the end result is there's 5,000 kids, potentially 80% of them, that are going to show up here possibly on September 8th if you guys change it, or September 4th if you don't. But we have to prepare that they're coming. And all of the things that we're required to do are not optional. So we're going to need to figure it out. And the good news on the financial piece, and Wendy would say something earlier with regards to cost, we were just notified a few hours ago that our federal CARES funding has been granted. So that $700,000 grant award from the U.S. government, that's kind of been spoken about. Now, the irony in that is we were notified that that's what we've been eligible for as far back as late April, early May. The state had put out guidelines as to what that funding could be used for. And the number one priority was addressing the digital divide. And Enfield was a perfect case for that because not all of our kids had access and to not only devices, but to internet accessibility. So that's when we made the decision back in the spring and informed the board that we were going to move forward to be a one-to-one district because we have to at this point. And there's still going to be an online component to this, regardless if we're in person or not. But we're in a better position today, as well as when it comes to the funding, that we were notified today that our application had been approved and that the funding should be coming down. I'm going to wait till the check's here before I actually stamp it, but the confirmation letter was received.
Another question has to do with the supplies and not being able to share them. With tables, the children will not have an area to store things overnight or from day to day. I read of one teacher who is not local, who's planning to get small plastic boxes and double-sided tape so that these boxes will be attached to the top of whatever table they're using in their classroom. But the whole supply issue is going to be a problem, isn't it?
It could be. Were you eavesdropping on our call this afternoon, Joyce?
No, I was not.
Just checking.
I would have if I could have.
I'm joking for anyone watching. That was actually a conversation that we had today with our elementary principals, and we're waiting for some confirmation from some of our department chairs. One of the concerns that we have, particularly with elementary students, is the sharing of supplies. And right now, we had held off on purchasing supplies where we traditionally would order those at the end of the school year because everything was in such limbo. But we're going to move forward with ordering supplies, and ultimately the goal, and I don't want to speak out of turn yet, is that each kit, for lack of a better term, would be identified by grade level. So a first grader, the expectation was each first grader would have a kit. And in that kit, it would consist of all the materials that student would need, their own box of crayons, their own markers, and then all our teachers would understand, and so we didn't use plastic boxes, but we used like Ziploc baggies, for example, and the ones where you can write your name on. So every kid would get a Ziploc baggie if all this stuff fit, and put it in there, and that doesn't leave the classroom. They're not taking their kid home. They're not bringing, that stays at their desk, their table, whatever we have. We'll have a designated area for it. But the concern is that, like for a special like art, if an art teacher walks in and they're going to paint for that day, and they've got 18 kids in the class, hypothetically, there's 18 paintbrushes that have to get disinfected and reused again by the time the art teacher goes into the next classroom. So what we're working on right now to identify is, from a curriculum standpoint for those courses, what will the instruction look like? What will the materials need to be look like? And then can we match them up with the supplies we're going to provide with kids, so that when the teacher comes in, the kids already have everything they need. We don't have to worry about sharing supplies and devices and utensils and things like that. There's also, now the kids will have an electronic device. Some of the mindset can get shifted to utilizing electronic means to work on some of that classwork as well. But in a perfect world, because it looks like increasingly more we can cohort to some degree outside of the transportation issue, is that anybody who comes into that classroom, all they have to bring is themselves and protective gear. And the materials don't have to leave the classroom on a daily basis or change hands from student to student. But right now, we're still in the infancy stages of gathering up the lists and identifying, and also soliciting teacher input by grade level to say, okay, this is what we have thus far. What are we missing? Because we want to make sure we provide every student what they need, so that they're in a position to leave their stuff on their desk every day and have the materials waiting for them when they come back to school the next day. So that's all in progress. But there's still a lot of behind the scenes administrative work to actually put the order in and get them delivered and designated. But that's the direction we're planning on going.
Okay, now to be difficult, if if the children are in cohorts, they will have at least one teacher for that group for the entire day, unless there are other areas like art or music, whatever. And theoretically, a teacher might need a break at some point for personal reasons, obviously. How will the teacher's room be set up in order to also avoid personal contact and all of those other problems that could exist when you even have a small group of teachers together?
You sure you weren't on?
No,
So
I wasn't eavesdropping.
you weren't eavesdropping. We are actually in the process, as we speak, trying to identify or relocate teacher faculty rooms, as they used to be called, or teacher rooms, so that social distancing measures can be enhanced for them as well. So right now, every building has a teacher's lounge or a teacher's workroom, whatever they call it in that particular building, and they're relatively small. So you are correct. Teachers are going to, they have well-needed and well-deserved breaks throughout the day. They are still entitled to lunch break. They're still entitled to prep time. So they are going to have they're not going to be stuck in that classroom all day long with their kids. And we are working now to designate more spacious areas of the building where teachers can go to utilize their break time in a safe and responsible way as well. And a lot of that is depending upon decisions we have to make around things we talked about earlier, where if we're not going to use certain rooms for certain things, we can convert those rooms into other. But that is under consideration now. Very seriously, it's just nothing's finalized at the moment, but I'm hoping relatively quickly we will have that plan. So that will all be part of the plan as well. I have 280 questions from teachers I have to try to answer on Thursday, and that's a big.
Well, we're gonna keep it at way less than 280. Scott, I'll get to you in 1 second. I just want to do
Thank
one
you.
more technology question. We've received a lot of feedback, both sides, negative and positive, about Teams. Was there a reevaluation done of whether or not Teams was the right platform before deciding to do, or in conjunction with deciding to do one-on-one devices at all levels?
Yes. The other platform that's out there is the Google platform. And unfortunately, there are some who prefer the Google platform. There are some that prefer the Teams platform. The reason that we never initially went to the Google platform, and the whole reason that we even have iPads to begin with, is because we are I don't want to say Windows 95, that's the wrong word. Paul Russell will kill me for this. We are a Microsoft Office town and district-wide. So that's why we're on Microsoft Teams. That's why we're on Office Suite, which is a Microsoft product. And that's why everyone's email address, who has a district email address, including students, is all on that same platform. If we were to go to, let's say, Chromebooks, for instance, Chromebooks only work in the Google platform. So we would have had to not only purchase the Chromebooks, but we would have had to purchase all the rights and responsibilities to utilize the Google platform to use, the kids and the teachers and families can use it as well as the device. The reason we went with iPads is because iPads can run a dual platform. So if we were to ever make that switch to go into, say, the Google platform, the devices aren't going to matter. It's simply downloading the app and using the apps on the device. That said, we've had a lot of conversation with staff members over the last several months who, when we first started this process, the gold standard in most people's minds have always been Google Classroom. Because we weren't necessarily using Teams to its full capacity, because again, we never were in a position to do that, the comparisons between what Google offered and what Teams offered were not necessarily equitable because we didn't know all of the functionality that Teams had. The other issue, to be quite honest, is if we were to switch platforms, it would be a complete platform change, not just district-wide, but for all of us. And it's quite expensive. And what we're finding, and I was the first one saying, because my kids use Google Classroom, so I'm familiar with it. And I've had this argument with our staff saying, well, I can do this with my kids' stuff, how can I cannot? And then it wasn't until they sat me down and showed me sort of a side-by-side of, this is what you think yours can do, this is what ours can do, and it's actually very similar, in some places enhanced through Teams. It's just we hadn't fully unleashed the capabilities of Teams thus far. So I was convinced that it wasn't worth the expense and the aggravation, and how do you train an entire district on how to use a brand new platform when everything's being done virtually anyway, as opposed to what we already own and the capabilities actually mirror what the other platform offers. So yes, it was done extensively, and it was done extensively by me being a thorn in everyone's side, because I was seeing what my kids were doing and what I was doing at work, and it wasn't correlating. I was wrong. There is, and that's part of the ongoing professional development for everyone, that we need to unleash the full power of what Teams can do. You're always going to have people who will prefer the other product. It's like people who, like Macs and PC people, that like that I never understood that, like why people take it so personal, but they do. That's just the world. People don't like it. If you like one, you don't like the other. It's very similar in this between the Teams and the Google folks. And then there are some concerns with that have happened over the years with information sharing with Google, and information getting out there and being used for commercial purposes. And I know that was a big concern at one point through other colleagues of mine. So that's a very long answer to the question. Yes, we looked at it. Yes, we already own it. Yes, the thing we own is just as good as what we could buy elsewhere without the expense, the training, and the added aggregation.
Thank you.
That said, people are still going to say I'm wrong, and I understand. And I gladly take on any of the questions and the hate mail people will send me for saying.
Scott, you had a question?
Yeah, something that I wanted to address, which I thought of recently as a 6-year walker to our K-2 school. The drop-off times currently at least K5 is a 15-minute window. So for example, for a K2 school, you have a first bell at 8:40 and you have a second bell at 8:55. So that's when the doors open. That's when the teachers welcoming the students that are, being driven in, that are traditional walkers. But in this day and age, most people are driven in. I know that early data from the surveys has shown that although 80% so far feel comfortable sending their kids to school, and that number may change because they didn't know masks were mandatory or they didn't know cohorting was mandatory, et cetera. So say that's 75%. We do know at this point that people are less comfortable on the buses or sending their students via bus. So I might be comfortable sending in my fourth grader, but to be safe and knowing that he's only going to be interacting with these 14 and a half classmates, I'll drive him in just to kind of keep the exposure down. So as a dad who walked for 6 years to Hazardville and who drives on occasion to Eli Whitney when my 8-year-old gets up late or plays a video game behind my back and isn't getting dressed, that 15-minute window now is tight. So I think that's something that we should consider expanding that, maybe making it 5 or 10 minutes earlier. We already know that at some schools, based on narrow roads, et cetera, that 15-minute window is barely enough now. If we increase drivers, AKA walkers, who get driven, I think that we need to look at that. So I wanted to bring that up to Chris and Andy as something to think about.
So can I just stop you before you get to the next question?
Yeah. Yes.
Maybe Joyce wasn't listening, but maybe you were eavesdropping. So these are
Joyce may not have been. I probably was.
So these are all considerations that are currently being discussed and being. I can assure you that we're well aware of the challenges with pickup and drop off, particularly in some buildings under normal conditions, who will remain nameless, but now increasing the percentage of people who might be choosing to drive their son or daughter into school. We're well aware of the concerns that you've shared, and that we're actually in the process of doing exactly what you're requesting, as far as trying to stagger times the best way we can. Pickup and drop off is going to be a big challenge, and it's going to be a big challenge in some schools, because it currently is a big challenge, just based on the way that the parking lots are divided. We do have to consult with the police department on some of these issues as well, because traffic flow is going to change. But we're having conversations with the principals who are in the process of trying to schedule all these things that I shared with you earlier, and trying to figure out the best way and the safest way, not just to get kids in and out of the building with the least amount of exposure to classmates, but also parents and whoever's picking them up in and out of the building as quickly but as safely as possible. So those are all things that, just deja vu, we spent a good 3 hours today talking about a lot of the questions that you and Joyce just brought up. And there are.
I was going to say, I appreciate that. And I know some of the things that we're asking, you're already having conversations about, but maybe somebody who's watching this for the first time, or, we're streaming for the first time this evening, et cetera, might have the same question. So I know that you guys think about some of these things before we bring it up, but some things I want to ask, because I want to make sure that people understand that we, as a concept, we are thinking about these things and they are being worked on. The other thing I wanted to ask about is, so again, 80%-ish say they're comfortable sending their students back. Again, 5 or 10% of the 80 may not have understood that masks were mandatory and that cohorting is mandatory. That's not Enfield's decision. That comes from the state of Connecticut and their recommendations. That being said, say that 80 dwindles to 75 or 70%. What I wanted to suggest, and I'm sure you're thinking about this as well, but in a school that has, say, 350 students and 260 are comfortable going to school, et cetera, 87 per building are going to stay home. So theoretically, in a 3-year school, and I'm just talking K-5, say 30 children per grade aren't comfortable going to school and they want to learn from home, so distance learning. Is there a consideration for there to be, say, one grade 1 teacher for those 30 kids times 3 buildings per grade level, K-5? So like, if you stay home, your teacher, if you had gone to school in classroom 16, was Mrs. Smith, but now that you've chosen to stay home, your classroom is virtual and your Mrs. Smith is now Mr. Smith. So we could have a teacher per grade level instructing, maybe not the whole 6.5 hours that the kids that went to school in person are learning, but a 90-minute chunk, a half hour off, kids get a lunch or a snack in the living room, they come back, they sit back on the computer, etc. I just wanted to know if there's any consideration for that, for having like a grade level virtual teacher, so we can at least more mirror what's happening if you went to Eli Whitney, if you went to Prudence Crandall versus staying home.
Yes. We are constantly having discussions on what that, what the differentiate, how we would differentiate the instruction for those who opt out as opposed to what a blanket distance learning plan would be. One of the areas I still am waiting for clarification on is, although the state has now permitted parents to opt out in the event we are coming back in person, they have not defined the district's responsibility for what that virtual component needs to be for those who opt out. Now, if we are forced to go to a hybrid and or all distance learning, that's a different story. It's pretty well defined as far as what the virtual program has to be. What's frustrating is it was kind of ambiguous about what that distance learning piece for those who voluntarily opt out for whatever period of time that might be. And a lot of that is going to be determined upon how many students we're actually talking about. Is it, and also another big component of that is staffing. So right now we send the same survey out to as parents. We also send a survey out to staff members, because you have to think there are teachers and staff members out there who want to come back to work, but they have their own underlying health issues where they may not be able to. Unfortunately for them at this moment, I don't have an answer as to what alternatives there are for them. That's another one of those questions that are sitting on the desk of a bunch of lawyers. Like, what do we do if people can't physically come back to work? One of the alternatives that we are talking about is for those staff, if we have staff members who physically can't return, and we have a population of students that aren't going to return, is there a way to match those up? Unfortunately, we don't necessarily, and that's another frustrating piece of this process, is how aggressive these timelines are. And it's understandable, because I was the first one to complain over the spring saying, you need to give us some time to make these decisions. Well, they did, but unfortunately, they're giving us time, and some pretty aggressive deadlines to meet. So a lot of that's going to be contingent upon how many students are home and how many staff members choose not to return. We could be in a position where no staff member wants to work virtually. Because if you heard anything loud and clear, our teachers didn't love the last 3 months of the school year teaching from home. Now, there may be some, for personal reasons, that they're not eligible to come back. We haven't gotten that information back from everybody yet. So, but yes, that is something that we are constantly having communication about amongst each other to see, if the circumstance presents themselves in that manner, that is an alternative that we can look into. But nothing has been definitive at this point yet. And part of the reason is, as I said, these aren't even decisions that I need to go to. Well, 9, those of you who are a part of the group of 9, before I can even present some things to you, I have to go through other steps and talk to other organizations to make sure there's no impact on other people's working conditions before we go ahead and make these. But these are conversations that are happening constantly throughout the early morning and late evening. And I probably just jinxed myself, which means I'll be on a call tonight about it later too.
Well, thank you very much.
Something else we can eavesdrop on?
Tell me how you do it, Joyce.
I'll just give you my seat, Joyce.
Okay, now we're going to go for a series of one-word answer questions to get back on track. See if you can do it. The state is
Who are the
not
questions for?
What'd you say?
Who are the questions for? The one-word answers.
Mr. Dresik, of course.
Oh, okay.
I
The state-
have a question when you are all wrapped up.
Yep. The state is not requiring temperature checking. Are we considering it at all?
No, we were advised not to. You want to know why? You said one-word answer.
Yes, of course we want to know why.
couple where they have concerns. The health department had concerns with the temperature outside, the kids taking temperatures as they come in the building. Then they have to actually bring them into the building to cool down to retake a temperature because you may get a false read. There was also concern about kids congregating as they're waiting in line to get their temperatures taken, and that defeats the purpose of social distancing. So that was the answer we were given on why we're not taking temperature checks.
Okay. Clearly, as part of going back to school, there's going to need to be some criteria around when you would consider either shutting down a classroom, a school, or the district. Is that going to be a state-driven guideline, or is that going to be a district-given criteria?
Both. Right now, if there's, for instance, for athletics, because they are allowed to, kids are allowed to work out right now under CIAC rules. If there's a positive test, kids automatically quarantine. They left the decision to superintendents. If there's the child that's partaking is showing symptoms, I have the decision to make whether I quarantine everyone. So we're erring on the side of caution. We're being told by the state that the guidelines will be coming from the state with regards to what do we do in the event there is a positive test, that those decisions will be made. The state is also saying to us, at what point do we institute one of these three plans? In the event something were to change that would make us go from in-person to the hybrid or down from the hybrid to the distance, the guidelines on that will be coming from the state. But as you said that, I did receive an email right before this meeting started from our Director of Public Health, who a lot of people are reaching out to her for that same very question. And it is very unclear right now on who's going to make that decision. What do we quarantine a classroom if there's a positive thing? So there is a blanket statement that all of us in the North Central Health Region will be answering that essentially says the decision will be made in consultation with the State Department of Health, local health director, and the superintendent. We don't have an answer.
Okay. Is the construction at JFK hindering our ability to open schools and comply with the state requirements?
It's not making it easy, but we'll figure it out.
And are any other buildings an option if needed, like Nathan Hale, the Annex, or Elkhorn?
No.
I knew we could do this. Jonathan, I know you had a question.
No, it was Charlotte who had a question.
Yeah, I know Charlotte does too, but Jonathan asked earlier. Go ahead, Jonathan.
He doesn't.
Just two quick ones. First being, the board received an email from an individual that asked about outdoor classrooms, and I don't want to take the idea from that individual, so I want to give him the credit. But like kind of like restaurants are doing, is there any plans for outdoor classrooms? And if so, the possibility of a tent or any kind of canopy that a lot of outdoor restaurants are doing as well?
Right now, the directive to all the principals is try to utilize outside space as much as humanly possible, whether it be for outside classes, whether it be for outside activities, whether it be for mass breaks. The question on tents is a little bit trickier because there are certain codes and we have to get other people involved in that. If you're going to put people under a tent, there could be fire code issues and things like that. But right now we have told all of our principals today, and they've already been working on it, try to utilize outdoor weather permitting as much as humanly possible for this process.
Okay, one more. Just an update. I know you talked about it at our board meeting last week, but any updates on after school programs?
At the moment, no. I can tell you that there's a lot of concerns with regards to, after school programs and sports, I have to look at two different things. Sports are going to be dictated by the CIAC, competitive sanctioned sports. After school activities is going to be another issue. That's going to be a local decision. And we really need to focus on what the actual school day. Right now, our priority is getting kids into school all day, best we can. And then we are going to address the after school activity portion of that afterward. But again, right now, our priority is going to be get kids into school and get them out of there as quickly as we can, because right now there is a lot of apprehension about kids being in there. So nothing definitive at this point, but we are having those conversations.
Thank you. That's all.
Charlotte?
Okay, thanks. So 2 questions. Did the state like specifically define, because this is about masks, and I hate even having to ask these questions, but did they specifically define? So if your child cannot wear a mask for whatever reason, like their special needs, they have sensory processing disorders, or they aren't mature enough to be able to keep it on all day, did the state specifically say and has guided that you should be prepared to keep your child at home? And then, conversely, what happens if you think that your child can wear a mask all day, but ultimately in the end, they can't? As the state opined on that.
On the second question, no. On the first question, face coverings that completely cover the nose and the mouth are required to attend in-person classes, with the exception if there is medical documentation provided that, again, has the right to be questioned and scrutinized in the event it is required to do so. So if a child has a medical condition that prohibits them from wearing a mask, the parent can, with written documentation from the child's physician, request that the child attend school without the mask. But the state hasn't given us specific guidelines as to what is acceptable and what is not. So what medical condition is it? Is it anxiety because your mouth is covered, or is it a breathing issue where you physically can't do that? That actually is a question in the hands right now of attorneys, because now you're getting into medical issues. You're getting into discriminating against kids for certain reasons. So right now we were told the expectation is everyone is wearing a face covering that completely covers the nose and the mouth. The exceptions will be worked out on an individual basis, but it will require, medical documentation.
Okay. And then I haven't seen anything, but has any of the state people or their legal opinions, have they said anything like if the state changes indoor capacities and numbers for gatherings, will that change the way that they allow kids to be in school buildings?
We have the only guidance we've received is what I've shared with you.
Yeah.
There's no addition to that or clarification that if conditions were to improve. Right now, a lot of the contingency is if conditions worsen and what to prepare for. There has not been any discussion, to my knowledge, of when conditions were to improve, if you could ease up on some of these.
Okay. Thanks.
Okay, we are on track.
Wendy, I raised my digital hand. I just have one last question.
Oh, go ahead.
Well,
I'm sorry.
I
didn't
shouldn't
see
say
your
one last question. I have one more question. Chris, so I'm on the JFK committee, and I specifically asked them at our last meeting if they were meeting with you and if there were discussions about changing their scheduling and making alternates to what they're doing when they're doing how they're doing it. So I just want to make sure that you're getting whatever information and feedback from them, and you're able to discuss whatever you need to with the building committee and the reps and Amar and everybody.
Yes, they have all been.
Perfect.
And I know Dr. Barrios is tweaking a plan that he sent over to me today that we're going to talk about tomorrow. So
Awesome.
everybody's
All right.
they've been awesome.
Thank you.
Okay, so do we have any other items from the table that people would like to discuss? Yes, Mr. Cruzel.
Sorry about that. Excellent meeting. I'm watching on YouTube, by the way. We had up to 83 people watching, so thank you for the folks out there for watching. That's important. I was in central office yesterday and today, but yesterday I got a little tour of all the iPads still in their boxes, but they're being opened as we speak. And then there was also 3 staff members working in one of the rooms, social distancing, obviously. And I wanted to thank them and everybody for the hard work they're doing to we got to reopen schools. That's priority 1, and it's very important. And all the studies you hear is on all the news channels is that schools got to reopen because it's hurting our kids and and it's making a difference. So I want to thank everybody for their hard work and thank everybody on this committee for being part of it. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, next meeting. Normally we were trying to do the Tuesdays between board meetings. But then we went to every other Tuesday, which is not the same thing. And right now we don't have any board meetings scheduled until August 25th, although I'm sure there will be some before then, especially if we need to change the date of school opening or whatever. I think this was a pretty good forum to answer some questions that I'm sure, parents are asking, and I know it's not all the answers everybody wanted. But it's going to take time to get all the answers out. So I will leave it open to, we could meet again in 2 weeks, which would be
July
July
28th.
28th. Or, certainly Mr. Dresik, if you think you'd like to meet sooner and do it in a week, because you'll have a lot more information, because obviously you never know when you're going to get a Twitter message that tells you something. We could do it in another week if you wanted to do another Q&A, because there's still a lot of questions out there pending that we didn't ask tonight.
It's not that I don't enjoy spending time answering the question. My only concern about next week is with the deadline of next Friday.
Yep.
I've asked everyone to clear their schedules, because the first priority is going to be making sure we meet the mandate of filling out the state template. So I'm just hesitant to commit myself to something not knowing, like, everything's culminating. Now, obviously, if things change, I can certainly be in communication with you, Wendy and Walter, and if you want to hold an additional meeting, we can advertise it. That would be my request at this point.
We'll schedule the next meeting for July 28th, same time, same channel.
Hey, I have a question, really quick, Wendy.
Yes.
So can we, committee, can we get, like, I don't even know if we can. I mean, I don't want anybody's personal information, but can we get like a brief synopsis of like what the results of the survey were, of the general questions, and, or I don't know if that's possible even.
Well,
Are you talking about
Then-
the parent survey, the family survey?
Yeah, the family survey, like, amount of people that are going on the bus and the people that are planning on going, and then like a rundown of what other questions might be without the personal information attached, just the results. Like a tally.
Probably, but you're not going to get them before the board does, because I don't want to get in trouble. If you were
Okay.
still in your previous position, I would have said absolutely. Now that you're on the council side, yeah, and we're gonna advertise that as well. I think parents are
Okay.
interested in knowing, and that's been kind of common amongst other districts. General information, obviously, the results showing that X percentage of families are planning on coming back, and transportation issues. So we will put that as part of our communication. But I can get that information to you guys.
But that's a good setup to remind everybody that this survey is due by end of business on Wednesday. So if you haven't done it yet, please do so.
Yeah, that's important.
Okay, keep the questions coming. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, meeting adjourned. Good night, all.
Hey, everyone.